Have you ever noticed how much easier it is to learn a completely new concept than to unlearn something you already believe?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, it's a completely different experience.
Right. Like, think about the actual physical sensation of it. If I sit you down to teach you the rules of I don't know, a brand new board game,
Yeah.
your mind is just a sponge.
Yeah, you're just taking it all in.
Exactly. You're adapting,
Yeah.
absorbing all the parameters of this new little universe. But if I try to convince you that a core belief you've held for, say, 10 years,
Good luck with that.
yeah, exactly. Like something foundational about your career trajectory or the mechanics of your relationships or just your baseline definition of success. If I tell you that's fundamentally flawed, you don't just politely nod and update your mental spreadsheet.
No, you physically recoil.
Right. Your heart rate might even spike. You immediately start constructing these like defensive walls in your mind.
Yeah, you're pulling up counter arguments before the other person has even finished their sentence.
Exactly. It's a deeply visceral reaction.
And, it's entirely universal. We tend to treat our beliefs not like software that can just be patched or updated. We treat them like the actual load-bearing architecture of our identity.
Yeah.
So to pull one of those foundational beliefs out, it doesn't feel like a simple correction. It feels like a structural collapse.
It really feels like cognitive surgery,
Yeah.
and usually without anesthesia.
Right.
So that stubborn architecture of the human mind and the just immense difficulty of remodeling it is our target for this deep dive.
It's a fascinating target, too.
It really is. We are exploring this highly layered philosophical dialogue between two thinkers, Max and Claude. And through their exchange, we're basically going on a hunt for the absolute bedrock coordinates of thought.
The meta models.
Yes, the meta models of reality itself.
Yeah.
But, just knowing the models isn't enough. We're also going to dissect the bizarre, kind of self-sabotaging mechanics of our own cognitive resistance.
Which is where it gets really messy. So messy. And ultimately, we're going to look at why you need to build these massive, powerful mental frameworks, only to ironically learn how to strategically destroy them.
Which, that presents a beautiful paradox for us to navigate today. We are going to examine the ultimate intellectual fortress and then explore the mandate for basically burning that very fortress to the ground.
Right.
And the source material here is so rich, it bridges mathematics, behavioral economics, psychology, and ancient philosophy.
It covers a lot of ground.
It really does. It starts with a seemingly dry statistical concept, Bayesian updating, and spirals into this rigorous demand for complete intellectual liberation.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to set the stage for you listening, Max poses a deeply ambitious question to Claude.
Yeah, he swings for the fences.
He really does. Like, a lot of us are familiar with Charlie Munger's approach to thinking, right? Munger famously operated with this lattice work of like 80 or 90 mental models.
Right, concepts pulled from microeconomics, biology, psychology. Exactly. And he overlaid them to make these brilliant multidisciplinary decisions. But Max goes a level deeper here.
She does.
He essentially asked Claude, what if we don't just want the models, but the meta-models?
Yeah. The underlying axes of reality itself.
Right. Like, if the universe has a base-level source code that applies equally across, physics, biological ecosystems, and human economies, what are those primary functions?
Max is essentially looking for the basement of reality.
Yeah, the absolute bottom floor.
He's not asking for a specific tool for a specific job, like a hammer or a wrench. He's asking for the underlying physics that allow tools to exist at all.
That's a great way to put it.
Like, if you picture an X and Y axis on a blank graph, those axes don't tell you what the specific data points are.
Right, they just provide the structure.
Exactly. They define the dimensional space in which all possible data must exist. And in response to this, Claude synthesizes 7 fundamental axes of reality.
7 cheat codes to the universe.
Pretty much. And these aren't just like definitions to memorize. They are profound laws. And the very first coordinate Claude identifies is Bayesian updating.
Okay, right. And I know the moment people hear Bayesian, they picture advanced statistics, graduate-level math, or like machine learning algorithms.
Yeah, their eyes just completely glaze over.
Exactly. But Claude frames this completely differently. He doesn't present it as a mathematical formula you have to solve on a chalkboard.
No, not at all.
He frames it as the operating system of epistemology. like the literal science of how we know what we know.
Right, because at its conceptual core, Bayesian updating just states that your current beliefs are simply prior probabilities.
Okay.
They are not absolute immutable truths. They are just your best working hypothesis based strictly on the limited information you've gathered up until this exact second.
Up until right now.
Yes. And the law of this axis mandates that when new evidence is introduced, you must execute an update.
You can't just ignore it.
Exactly. You have to shift the probability weight of your belief.
So give me a tangible mechanism for that. Like, how does this actually play out in high-stakes environments?
Well, take medical diagnostics. That's a classic example.
Okay.
A brilliant diagnostician doesn't just look at a positive test result for a rare disease and instantly declare, you have the disease.
Right, because tests can be wrong.
Exactly. The doctor first calculates the base rate. That's the probability of you having this extremely rare disease before the test was even administered.
So, like, 1 in a million, maybe?
Right. Let's say it's 1 in a million. Then they take the accuracy of the test into account. But here's the kicker. Even if the test is 99% accurate, the sheer rarity of the disease means that a positive result is still mathematically more likely to be a false positive than a true reflection of reality.
Wait, really? Even at 99% accuracy?
Yes. Because that 1% error rate across a million people produces a ton of false positives, far outnumbering the one actual sick person.
Oh, wow. Okay, I see.
So the doctor takes the prior belief, the extreme rarity of the disease, collides it with the new evidence of the test, and generates a new, updated posterior probability. It is a continuous, dynamic recalibration.
I want to translate that continuous recalibration to a really daily scale for the listener, just to make it super concrete.
Sure.
Think about checking your weather app before you leave for work. The app says there is a 0% chance of rain today.
Okay, so that is your prior belief, your prior probability.
Exactly. And you are highly confident in it. So you get dressed, you ignore the umbrella sitting by the door, and you walk outside.
Naturally.
But the moment you step out, you feel water hitting your face.
Yeah.
You see puddles forming on the asphalt. You see, like, people running for cover with newspapers over their heads.
Right, and that is your new evidence.
Right. And this exact moment is where the Bayesian update is mathematically and logically demanded, isn't it?
Yes, you have a direct collision between your prior belief, the app's forecast of zero rain, and the new undeniable environmental evidence of physical rain.
So if you refuse to do a Bayesian update in that moment, what does that actually look like?
It looks crazy.
Right. You would stand there getting completely soaked, staring at your phone and yelling, but the screen says it's sunny.
Yeah, you're literally rejecting the physical water hitting your face to protect the integrity of your prior belief.
And it sounds completely absurd when we talk about rain.
Yeah.
Like no one would actually do that. But Claude's point is that we do this exact thing constantly in our social, political, and professional lives.
Oh, all the time.
Wow.
And this leads to Claude's really brilliant redefinition of confirmation bias.
Yeah. Tell me about that.
So we usually classify confirmation bias as this like soft psychological quirk, a slight blind spot.
A little character flow.
Right. But Claude defines it mathematically. He says confirmation bias is simply the outright refusal to execute a Bayesian update.
Wow.
It is standing in the rain, clutching the weather app, and denying the water.
That's such a powerful image.
When we encounter hard evidence that contradicts our deeply held political ideology or challenges the business strategy we just bet our company's runway on, we frequently refuse to shift the probability.
We just ignore the puddles.
We discard the evidence to protect the prior. Understanding this first axis means accepting that there is zero certainty in the universe. There are only constantly updated probabilities.
Okay, so the bedrock of reality is shifting probabilities.
Right.
But if everything is constantly shifting, why do things feel so heavy? Like, why do things decay if we stop paying attention to them? That pulls us perfectly into axis number 2, which is entropy, the tendency toward increasing disorder.
Yes. This is the second law of thermodynamics, and it is arguably the most inescapable rule of physics.
It's the big one.
It really is. The astrophysicist Arthur Eddington famously noted that if your theory is found to contradict the second law of thermodynamics, you have no hope. There is nothing for it but to collapse in deepest humiliation.
That's quite a statement.
Right. Because entropy dictates the ultimate one-way street of the universe. Closed systems naturally, inevitably progress from order to disorder.
But Claude doesn't just leave this in the realm of, like, heat dissipating in a closed vacuum in a physics lab. He pulls entropy into the macro world.
He does. He applies it directly to the structures of human life. Consider organizational bloat.
Oh, yeah. Every corporate worker knows this one.
Exactly. You launch a startup. In the beginning, it's a highly ordered, lean, efficient machine. Everyone knows their role. Communication is instantaneous.
It's highly ordered.
But fast forward 10 years, if you haven't actively fought it, the company now has like 5 redundant layers of middle management.
Endless committee meetings required to approve a single, simple email.
Right, and a labyrinthine HR department. That bloat isn't necessarily because you hired malicious people or even incompetent people.
It's just entropy.
Exactly. It is the natural entropic decay of a system's efficiency.
Mm.
Or consider biological aging, you know?
Mm.
It's just the slow, gradual breakdown of cellular order and DNA replication fidelity over time.
Let me push back on this a little, or at least challenge the bleakness of it.
Sure.
Because if entropy is this universal, unstoppable law dictating that everything falls apart, how do complex, highly ordered things exist at all?
That's the golden question.
Right. How do we have intricate biological bodies or massive skyscrapers or the very mental models we were discussing? Doesn't the sheer existence of complex life violate entropy?
And that is the exact friction point where the real lesson of entropy emerges. Complex life doesn't violate entropy. It actually operates within it by exploiting a loophole.
A loophole?
Yes, the loophole regarding closed versus open systems. Your body or a skyscraper or a company is not a closed system.
Okay.
You can maintain or even increase order, meaning you can decrease local entropy, but only by injecting massive amounts of energy from the outside.
Ah, I get it. So if I have a perfectly clean kitchen and I do absolutely nothing to it, over a month, dust settles, spiders build webs.
Yeah.
Maybe the pipes leak.
Right, it naturally decays.
So to maintain the order of that clean kitchen requires continuous active energy input. I have to scrub, I have to vacuum.
Precisely. Maintaining order requires continuous energy expenditure. And when you expend that energy, when you literally burn calories to scrub the kitchen, you are actually increasing the overall entropy of the universe outside your kitchen through the heat your body generates.
Oh, wow.
So the universe's total entropy still goes up, but your kitchen stays clean.
That is fascinating. So applying this to the listener's daily life, letting go is a guarantee of decline.
Absolutely.
Think about a friendship. If you have a best friend and neither of you puts energy into texting, calling, or organizing dinners, that relationship does not stay perfectly suspended in the amber of your past memories.
No, it decays. The emotional distance just naturally grows.
Entropy applies just as ruthlessly to human connection as it does to thermodynamics. If you want to keep an organization efficient, a body healthy, or a marriage strong, you have to fight the fundamental current of the universe by constantly injecting energy.
And that reality, the fact that ordered systems must constantly adapt and consume energy to survive the pull of entropy, leads us directly to axis number 3.
Which is evolution.
Yes. Specifically, the universal algorithm of variation, selection, and heredity.
You know, most of us hear the word evolution and immediately picture, like, Charles Darwin sketching finch beaks on the Galapagos Islands.
Right. We lock the concept entirely inside the domain of biology.
Exactly. But Claude argues that Darwin's algorithm is a universal mathematical certainty. It is not restricted to carbon-based life forms.
It is what we call a substrate-neutral algorithm.
Meaning it works on anything.
Exactly. If you have any system that contains 3 specific conditions, evolution is guaranteed to occur.
Okay, what are the 3?
Condition 1 is variation. You need a population of things that are slightly different from one another.
Makes sense.
Condition 2 is selection. You need an environment with limited resources or specific pressures that determines which of those variations survive or fail.
Okay, and the 3rd?
Condition 3 is heredity. The survivors must have some mechanism to pass their successful traits on to the next generation. If those 3 conditions are met, blind trial and error will produce highly adapted complexity.
I want to dig into the mechanics of this because it's fascinating how it solves really complex problems without a conscious designer.
Oh, it's brilliant.
The source material mentions the immune system. Walk us through how the immune system uses this algorithm.
It's probably one of the most elegant examples of evolution occurring within your own body right now.
Really?
Yeah. When a novel virus enters your system, your immune system doesn't look at the virus, analyze its structure, and intelligently design a custom antibody to fight it.
It doesn't have a little blueprint.
No blueprint at all. Instead, it relies on variation. Your B cells undergo a process called somatic hypermutation.
That sounds intense.
It is. Exactly, that's the variation phase. Then comes the selection pressure. These random antibodies physically bump into the virus.
And most of them fail.
Almost all of them. 99.9% of them do absolutely nothing, but by sheer statistical probability, one of those random mutations happens to bind perfectly to the viral antigen.
Wow.
That specific B cell is then selected by the environment. Finally, you have heredity. Once that successful B cell binds, it receives a chemical signal to multiply rapidly, cloning itself millions of times to flood your system with the winning key.
It looks like genius, top-down design, but it's actually just a ruthless bottom-up algorithm.
Exactly.
And Claude points out this applies to human ideas too. He brings up Karl Popper's philosophy of science, the concept of falsification.
Yes, Popper argued that science doesn't actually advance by proving theories true. It advances by proving theories false.
Right.
And Claude maps this perfectly onto the evolutionary algorithm. Scientists generate a massive variation of hypotheses.
That's the variation.
Then they subject those hypotheses to the brutal selection pressure of peer review and rigorous experimentation.
And the weak theories die.
Exactly, they are falsified. The theories that survive the testing are published, built upon, and taught to the next generation of scientists. That's heredity.
You see this constantly in free market economics too. If 100 new restaurants open in a city, that's your variation.
Right.
The market environment, like customer tastes, rent prices, supply chains, acts as the selection pressure. The restaurants with terrible service or overpriced food go bankrupt. They die off.
Yep.
The ones that figure out the perfect menu survive and eventually franchise, spreading their specific DNA across other cities.
So if evolution relies on the environment selecting the winners, what happens when the winners start changing the environment?
And that transitions us beautifully to axis number 4. Feedback loops.
Okay.
Because causality in complex systems is rarely a straight line. Claude asserts that linear cause and effect is mostly an illusion we use to comfort ourselves. Reality is intensely circular. We are deeply conditioned to think linearly, aren't we? Like,
Yeah.
I push a domino, it hits the next domino, which hits the next.
I bet.
Event A causes event B, end of story.
But in reality, the effect feeds back into the cause. You have positive feedback loops, which amplify the direction of a system, and negative feedback loops, which stabilize or dampen a system.
Let's look at a positive feedback loop, because these are the ones that spiral out of control. Think about the recommendation algorithm on, any social media platform you use.
This is a terrifyingly effective feedback loop.
It really is. Let's say you linger for 3 extra seconds on a video about an extreme political conspiracy.
Just 3 seconds.
Right. The algorithm, which is constantly measuring your behavior, registers that pause. It feeds you 2 more videos with slightly more intense versions of that content. You watch those, perhaps getting a little outraged or engaged.
And the algorithm measures your increased engagement. In response, it alters its own behavior, flooding your entire feed with that exact type of polarizing content. Your initial behavior caused the algorithm to change, but then the algorithm's change causes your behavior to change even further. You become more radicalized, which signals the algorithm to push even more extreme content.
The effect has become the cause.
Exactly.
You see this in economics with hyperinflation, right?
Yeah.
Look at historical examples like Weimar Germany or Zimbabwe.
The mechanics of hyperinflation are pure positive feedback loops. The government prints money, causing prices to rise slightly. Because prices are higher, workers cannot afford basic goods, so they demand higher wages.
Right.
To afford the higher wages, businesses must raise prices even further. To keep the economy moving at these new prices, the government prints even more money,
Round and round it goes.
accelerating exponentially until the currency just completely collapses. To change reality in these situations, you cannot just address a linear cause. You have to find a way to structurally shatter the loop.
Okay, so we have probabilities, entropy, evolution, and feedback loops. These loops build incredible complexity over time. But at a certain point, a system becomes so complex that it stops just being more of the same thing and becomes something entirely new.
Yes.
Which brings us to axis number 5, emergence.
Emergence is deeply counterintuitive because it breaks our traditional reductionist view of science.
Reductionism being like taking things apart to understand them.
Right. Reductionism says that to understand a complex thing, you just break it down into its smallest parts and study the individual parts.
Okay.
Emergence dictates the exact opposite. It says that the whole is fundamentally greater than and entirely different from the sum of its parts.
Interesting.
When individual components interact at scale, entirely new properties arise that do not exist anywhere in the parts themselves.
The classic example, and I think Claude uses this, is water. H2O.
Yes.
If I hand you a single molecule of water in a microscope and you study that isolated molecule for 1,000 years, you will never, ever discover the property of wetness.
No, because a single water molecule is not wet.
Right. Wetness does not exist at the atomic level.
But if you combine billions of those exact same molecules, the interaction between them generates surface tension, fluid dynamics, and viscosity. Wetness emerges from the relationship between the parts, not the parts themselves.
And the most profound, frankly mind-bending example of emergence is sitting inside our skulls right now as we have this conversation.
The human brain.
Yeah.
If a neuroscientist isolates a single neuron in a petri dish, what are they actually looking at? It is merely a biological switch. It manages chemical gradients and fires tiny electrical action potentials.
Pretty basic.
Very basic. A single neuron does not have memories of your childhood. A single neuron does not comprehend the concept of entropy. It doesn't feel grief or joy.
But you wire 86 billion of those biological switches together, allow them to send feedback loops among themselves, and suddenly, human consciousness emerges.
It's incredible.
It is. The ability to compose a symphony, or feel existential dread, or, listen to a deep dive about philosophy, arises entirely from wet tissue.
And this has massive implications for how we solve problems in the real world.
How so?
Well, if you are a CEO trying to fix a toxic corporate culture, you cannot solve it by interviewing every employee individually and analyzing their standalone personalities.
Because the toxicity isn't in the individual.
Exactly. The toxicity is likely an emergent property of how the incentive structures force those individuals to interact. You have to change the system of interactions, not just the individual components.
Which perfectly sets up a tool for dealing with these impossibly complex emergent systems. Axis number 6, inversion.
Carl Gustav Jacob Jacobi, a brilliant 19th century mathematician, popularized the maxim, invert, always invert.
I love that quote.
It's so useful because complex systems are often too tangled to solve with forward linear thinking. The most powerful tool is often to think backwards.
So instead of asking, how do I achieve this incredibly complex positive outcome? You ask, what actions would guarantee absolute catastrophic failure?
Right.
And then you dedicate your energy to rigorously avoiding those specific actions.
Exactly. By defining the negative space around a problem, you often reveal the shape of the solution much faster than by staring directly at it.
That makes a lot of sense.
This is a foundational principle in mathematical proofs by contradiction. If you want to prove that there is an infinite number of prime numbers, it's hard to just keep counting forever.
Because it's infinite.
Right, so you invert it. You assume there is a finite number of primes. Then you walk that assumption forward until it creates a mathematical absurdity. By proving the finite assumption is impossible, you prove the infinite reality is true.
We see this deeply embedded in complex engineering, too. Think about the Apollo missions, or like building a suspension bridge.
Oh, absolutely.
The engineers don't sit around a table just visualizing a successful launch or a sturdy bridge. They conduct obsessive failure mode and effects analysis.
They're looking for disasters.
Yes, they list every conceivable way a seal could freeze, a sensor could short circuit, or a cable could snap under high winds. They designed the system specifically to survive those inversions.
And this isn't just for math and rockets, by the way. The Stoics baked inversion into their daily psychological practice with premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils.
I've heard of that.
Yeah, they wouldn't wake up and manifest positive thoughts about wealth and health. They would actively, vividly imagine losing their status, contracting a terrible illness, or being exiled.
That sounds depressing.
It sounds like it, but by inverting their desire for a comfortable life and mentally inhabiting a tragic one, they achieved two things.
Who are they?
First, they built immense psychological resilience against actual misfortune. And second, they generated profound, immediate gratitude for the present moment. Inversion strips away the noise.
Okay, we're at the 7th and final bedrock coordinate. And this one acts as a giant warning label pasted over the first 6. Axis number 7. The map is not the territory.
All models are wrong, but some are useful.
That's George Box, right?
Yes. That aphorism is the ultimate expression of epistemological humility. The concept that the map is not the territory means that your internal perception of reality, no matter how mathematically rigorous or philosophically sound, is not reality itself.
It's just a proxy.
It is merely a heavily compressed, simplified projection.
If you're visiting New York City and I hand you a pocket map of the subway system, That map is incredibly useful. It helps you get from Brooklyn to Manhattan.
Right.
But the map doesn't capture the smell of roasted nuts on Fifth Avenue, the sound of the subway brakes squealing, or the wind coming off the Hudson River. If the map captured all the complexity of the actual city, it would be the city, and it would be far too large to fold up and put in your pocket.
Exactly. A model must discard information to be useful. But the danger arises when we forget that we discarded information.
That's when we get into trouble.
Huge trouble. And this theme echoes throughout human history. In Plato's allegory of the cave, prisoners mistake the two-dimensional shadows cast on the wall for the three-dimensional reality of the world.
Right, the shadows are the map.
Yes. In the 18th century, Immanuel Kant meticulously defined the boundary between the phenomenon, the world exactly as it appears to our sensory apparatus, and the noumenon, or the thing in itself.
Which is the actual territory.
Exactly. It's the objective reality that exists entirely independent of our observation, and which we can never truly access.
It even reaches into modern physics, doesn't it?
Yes. Look at the quantum observer effect. If you fire electrons through a barrier with two slits and you don't measure which slit they pass through, they behave like a wave, creating an interference pattern on the wall behind it.
Okay.
But the moment you place a detector to measure which slit the electron goes through, the wave function collapses. The electron behaves like a solid particle, and the pattern changes.
Just by observing it.
Just by observing it. The sheer act of the observer measuring the territory actually alters the territory.
Let me see if I have this right. You're saying that every single cognitive bias, every piece of political dogma, every stubborn argument we have, essentially stems from a failure of Axis 7.
In a way, yes.
We mistake our internal, simplified map of how the world works for the complex, messy territory of the actual world.
Precisely. Maintaining a deep, abiding skepticism of your own models, knowing that they're just temporary tools of compression, is the absolute most important meta-model of all.
It's the safeguard.
Right. Claude presents these 7 axes: Bayesian updating, entropy, evolution, feedback loops, emergence, inversion, and the map, versus the territory. Not as a finalized dogmatic religion, but as the underlying scaffolding of reality.
Okay, let's take a breath here. Because looking at this structure we've just built, it is magnificently elegant.
It's a beautiful system.
It really is. If you can actually internalize these 7 axes, you essentially possess the cheat codes to the universe. You can navigate complex systems, avoid cognitive traps, and adapt to any environment.
In theory, yes.
But this brings up a massive, painfully grounded question.
I know where you're going with this.
If you are listening to this right now, you might be nodding along thinking this is brilliant. But tomorrow morning, when your boss unfairly criticizes your work, or your partner does that one thing that drives you crazy, or you read a headline that triggers your political rage, are you actually going to pause, take a deep breath, and say, let me perform a Bayesian update on my prior probabilities and check my map against the territory?
Unlikely.
Exactly. You aren't going to do that.
Yeah.
You're going to get defensive, you are going to get angry, and you're going to dig your heels in. So if these are the ultimate cheat codes, why is it so incredibly hard for us to actually utilize them when it matters most?
And this exact tension is where the dialogue between Max and Claude takes a sudden, highly introspective turn.
They get real.
They do. They pivot from theoretical physics to the messy reality of human psychology. Claude essentially calls Max out.
What does he say?
He says, Max, you are highly articulate about Bayesian updating. But in your actual lived experience, when you encounter evidence that shatters one of your core beliefs, do you actually update? Or do you instinctively hunt for reasons to defend your original stance?
Oof, that is a direct hit.
It is. And Max, to his immense credit, drops the intellectual facade. He admits the truth. He says, I feel resistance.
And that single word, resistance, is our gateway into part 2 of this deep dive, the architecture of cognitive resistance.
Claude dissects this admission of resistance with surgical precision.
Yeah.
He doesn't let Max brush it off. He breaks this resistance down into 2 very distinct, very powerful phases: cognitive resistance and emotional resistance.
Okay, let's examine the cognitive side first.
Right. Dismantling a complex intellectual framework is, structurally speaking, an incredibly difficult task.
It's exactly like Thomas Kuhn's concept of paradigm shifts, isn't it? Kuhn looked at the history of science and made a rather cynical but highly accurate observation about how brilliant scientists actually behave.
Yes. Kuhn noted that when a new mathematically superior theory emerges, say the shift from a Ptolemaic Earth-centric model of the solar system to a Copernican sun-centric model, the scientific community does not look at the new telescope data, collectively slap their foreheads, say, we were wrong, and smoothly adopt the new model.
No, they fight it tooth and nail. They actively try to destroy the new evidence.
Because the old guard has built their entire careers, their textbooks, their prestige on the old paradigm. Kuhn argued that old paradigms are rarely gracefully abandoned through logic.
So how do they change?
Instead, the people who hold the old paradigms simply have to age out and eventually die, allowing a new generation of scientists who grew up with the new data to establish the new paradigm. That is cognitive resistance playing out on a multi-generational societal scale.
To bring that to an individual level, think of your worldview as a massive, intricate game of Jenga.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
If you hold a belief about how capitalism works or how a marriage should function, that belief isn't floating in a vacuum. It is a foundational block at the bottom of the tower.
Dozens of other beliefs, habits, and daily decisions are stacked on top of it. If new evidence forces you to do a Bayesian update on that core belief, you aren't just swapping out a line of code.
You are pulling a load-bearing block.
Right. And when you pull that block, it changes the weight distribution of your entire mental tower. The whole structure of your worldview wobbles and often collapses into a chaotic mess on the table.
And nobody wants that.
Exactly.
Yeah?
It is intellectually terrifying to face that collapse. It is so much easier, so much more stable to just swat the new evidence away and keep your tower standing.
The more exquisite and interconnected your intellectual framework is, the more profound the cognitive resistance you'll feel to tearing it down. But Claude argues that the second type of resistance is even more insidious and much harder to overcome: emotional resistance.
This is where it gets deeply personal.
Yes, this occurs when our models cross the boundary from being tools we use to becoming identities we are.
This is where the danger truly lies. Like, if I have a literal hammer and the handle snaps, I throw it in the trash and buy a new hammer. I don't mourn the hammer.
Right.
But if a belief has become fused to my sense of self,
Then an attack on the belief is processed by your brain as an attack on your physical survival. Claude connects this to Daniel Kahneman's behavioral economic principle of loss aversion.
right, Kahneman.
Kahneman proved that human beings feel the psychological pain of losing something roughly twice as intensely as they feel the pleasure of gaining something of equivalent value.
So losing $100 hurts much more than finding $100 feels good.
Exactly. But Claude applies loss aversion not to money, but to ideas.
That is profound.
When you are presented with evidence that destroys a cherished, identity-bound belief, your brain does not process it as, oh, wonderful, I have gained a new, more statistically accurate perspective on reality.
And nobody thinks that way.
No. Your brain processes it as a genuine, visceral loss. It triggers actual grief. It triggers a defensive ego response. You are no longer operating in a state of intellectual curiosity. Your amygdala has hijacked the wheel, and you're operating in pure survival mode to protect your sense of self.
And what's fascinating is how Max attempts to deflect this diagnosis. He looks at his own history of resisting new evidence, and he tries to offer a very casual excuse.
He tries to play it off.
He does. He says, well, maybe I'm just lazy. He tries to use laziness as a blanket explanation for why he doesn't update his models. And Claude immediately calls his bluff.
This is one of the most masterful sequences in their entire dialogue. Claude does not let Max hide behind laziness. He points out a glaring empirical contradiction in Max's behavior.
Claude looks at Max and essentially says, hold on, look at your life. You are a person who curates over 50 complex mental models. You read incredibly dense philosophy for fun. You're writing academic papers, coding, and exploring the depths of epistemology late into the night.
Right, he's incredibly driven.
You have an immense capacity for sustained effort. You are the exact opposite of a lazy person. So what is actually happening in your mind?
Claude realizes that Max is mislabeling his own internal map. Laziness is an inaccurate, low-resolution label. It is a convenient, low-energy excuse designed specifically to help Max avoid investigating the true, highly uncomfortable nature of his own psychological resistance.
It's a shield.
Yes, if he can just claim he's lazy, he doesn't have to face the terrifying prospect that his identity is fragile.
This brings up what I think is the most profound quote in the entire source material. We have to talk about the psychological physics of demolition.
Let's do it.
Claude says building a new framework provides dopamine, a sense of progress, structure, and control. Tearing down an old framework offers no immediate reward. It only offers temporary chaos and a frightening loss of control.
It is a stunning insight into neurobiology and learning. Think about the distinct types of energy required for those two actions. When you are learning a brand new topic, say building a new mental model about a field you know nothing about, your brain chemically rewards you.
You feel good.
You do. You get a dopamine hit from snapping those pieces of information together. You feel smarter. You feel like you are conquering new territory and imposing order on the universe. Building feels fantastic.
It's constructive energy, like building a beautiful Lego castle. You can see your progress block by block.
But dismantling a deeply held belief. Demolition requires a fundamentally different, much darker, heavier kind of energy. There is zero dopamine hit when you suddenly realize you've been entirely wrong about something for 5 years.
None at all.
There is no immediate rush of progress when you plunge your own mind into confusion and ambiguity. Tearing down an old framework feels like stepping off solid ground into a void. It requires a tremendous amount of intellectual courage and a high tolerance for psychological pain, things that most people simply refuse to endure.
And to definitively prove this to Max, Claude doesn't just theorize about it. He actually performs a live, real-time Bayesian update right there in the text, using Max's own behavior as the dataset.
It is a brilliant structural move. Claude sets up two competing hypotheses to explain Max's resistance.
Okay, what are they?
Hypothesis 1, Max is simply lazy. This is a global, low-energy explanation. Hypothesis 2, Max has a highly specific, intense psychological fear of dismantling systems that are intricately bound to his identity.
Then Claude introduces the new evidence. Max works tirelessly, reads constantly, and expends massive amounts of energy when he's building new knowledge structures.
Now, Claude runs the Bayesian calculation. If hypothesis 1, that Max is lazy, were true, he wouldn't possess the energy to build new things. The evidence completely falsifies hypothesis 1.
Right.
However, if hypothesis 2, that Max fears the chaos of demolition, is true, it perfectly explains the contradiction. It explains why Max has boundless energy for creation, but sudden, paralyzing laziness when it comes to destruction.
The probability weight shifts entirely.
Overwhelmingly to hypothesis 2. Claude uses the very tool they are debating, Axis 1, Bayesian updating, to diagnose his conversational partner's psychological block.
Max must have been sitting there feeling incredibly exposed.
No, I'm sure he was.
But he digests it, and it prompts him to ask a natural follow-up question, which moves us into part 3 of our deep dive, the danger of the framework prison. Max says, okay, these 7 axes are powerful, but wait, what about first principles?
Ah, yes. First principles.
Right, we hear Silicon Valley executives talking about first principles thinking all the time. Max asks, isn't first principles the ultimate coordinate?
It is a very common conflation, and Claude immediately clarifies the structural distinction. First principles thinking, the practice of boiling a problem down to its absolute, unquestionable fundamental truths and reasoning up from there, is not a coordinate axis of reality. It is an operating method.
Let's go back to our map analogy to make sure this is crystal clear for the listener.
Sure.
If the 7 meta-models, entropy, emergence, Bayesian updating, are the actual latitude and longitude lines drawn on the map of reality, first principles is a compass you hold in your hand to navigate those lines.
That is the perfect distinction. The compass is a vital tool. It tells you how to break a problem down and find your bearings. But the compass itself does not represent a fundamental law of physics like entropy does.
Right.
First principles is a technique for utilizing the coordinates. It is not a coordinate itself.
Once Max understands this, he asks a question that, frankly, terrified me when I read it.
What was it?
He looks at these 7 incredibly powerful acts, and he says, if these are universally true, should I hardwire them into my brain? Should I write them into my permanent operating manual for how to live my life? Or, if I do that, will these coordinates eventually trap me?
And Claude's response is a resounding, definitive yes. If you hardwire them, they will absolutely trap you.
That's a scary thought.
It introduces the most vital warning of the entire dialogue. Claude invokes Charlie Munger's famous cautionary proverb, to a man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
This is the danger of the framework prison. I want you listening to imagine this scenario. You take this deep dive to heart, you write down these 7 axes on a card and carry it everywhere.
Okay.
Tomorrow evening, your partner comes to you, clearly frustrated, and says, you haven't been listening to me lately. I feel like we're drifting apart.
Uh-oh.
Right?
Right.
If you were locked inside the framework prison, you might look at them and say, I know what this is. This is an issue of entropy. A relationship is a closed system that has lacked sufficient energy input, leading to a natural decay into disorder. Therefore, I must initiate a positive feedback loop of active listening to counter the entropic drift.
which, while technically employing the vocabulary of reality, would be an incredibly effective way to ensure your partner leaves the room and you sleep on the couch.
Exactly. You've taken a fluid, nuanced, emotionally complex human interaction and violently forced it into a rigid analytical box.
So destructive.
If you force every single problem at your job, every creative block in your art, and every conflict in your relationships into the Bayesian box or the emergence box, the frameworks stop acting as lenses that help you see the world clearly. They mutate into a prison that dictates how you are allowed to see the world.
And the deep irony here is that doing so explicitly violates axis number 7. The map is not the territory. By forcing the messy reality of a human relationship into an entropic checklist, you are mistaking your brilliant, newly acquired map for the actual, breathing territory of life.
So how do we avoid this?
To solve this dilemma, Claude offers a profound operational shift. He distinguishes between using frameworks as rigid operating instructions versus treating them as objects of observation.
Break that down for us. What is the behavioral difference between those two approaches?
If you treat a framework as an operating instruction, you approach a complex problem and command your brain from the top down. I must solve this problem using the evolutionary model.
You're forcing it.
You are aggressively imposing the framework onto reality. It makes your thinking rigid and brittle. But if you treat the framework as an object of observation, your posture is entirely different.
How so?
You look closely at the messy, unstructured problem first. Then, you gently hold the evolutionary framework up to it, almost like trying on a pair of glasses, and you ask, I wonder if this situation naturally fits an evolutionary model. Let me observe.
I see.
You note where the model successfully illuminates the problem, and, crucially, you note the exact places where the model completely fails to explain the reality in front of you.
It's the difference between looking at a piece of hardware and saying, this is a nail, therefore I must hit it with my hammer, versus looking at it and saying, is this a nail? Let's gently see if the hammer works. Oh, wait, it has threads. It's a screw. I will put the hammer away and go find a screwdriver.
Perfect analogy. Observation preserves your flexibility and your humility. Operation creates blind dogma.
Which brings us to the philosophical climax of the source material. Part 4. The ultimate goal, catching the fish and forgetting the trap.
This is where it all comes together.
Max has clearly been put through an existential ringer during this conversation. He has learned the models, confronted his own psychological resistance to them, and recognized the danger of becoming trapped by them. So he asks the ultimate question.
He essentially says, okay, Claude, if I shouldn't hardwire these models into my brain, if my life's purpose isn't just to flawlessly execute Bayesian updates and inversion exercises until the day I die, then what is my purpose? What is the point of spending years learning all this complex architecture?
It is a breathtaking moment of vulnerability in the dialogue.
It is. And Claude actually pauses the intellectual sparring to praise Max for it.
Yeah.
He points out the profound, rare self-awareness required to spend years painstakingly building a massive, powerful, intellectually intoxicating structure of knowledge, and then to possess the humility to stand back, look at it, and ask, why should I surrender myself to this creation?
It takes an immense amount of ego and drive to build the intellectual tower, but it takes profound wisdom to realize you shouldn't lock the door and live inside it. So how does Claude answer him?
To answer this ultimate existential question, Claude transcends Western analytical mathematical thought entirely. He reaches back thousands of years into ancient Eastern philosophy.
Wow.
He introduces a concept from the foundational Taoist philosopher Zhuangzi, the metaphor of the fish trap. In Chinese, the phrase is 一丝no.
Let's translate and deeply unpack this metaphor for everyone listening because it is visually stunning.
These do.
Imagine an ancient fisherman. He is weaving a complex, intricate trap out of bamboo. He spends countless hours making sure the lattice is perfectly tight, calculating the exact angle of the entrance so the fish can swim in but cannot swim out.
It's a masterpiece of engineering.
Right. He wades into the river and sets it. Hours later, a fish swims inside. The fisherman pulls the heavy trap out of the water, opens the hatch, and takes the fish into his hands. He has secured his dinner. What does he do next?
He doesn't strap that heavy, soaking wet bamboo trap to his back and carry it with him everywhere he goes for the rest of his life.
Exactly. He puts it down on the riverbank, he forgets it. The entire purpose of the trap was to catch the fish. Once the fish is in your hands, the trap is entirely obsolete.
It is a flawless metaphor. What Claude is revealing to Max and what this deep dive is proposing to you is that these magnificent mental frameworks, the 7 axes of reality, the intricate mechanics of Bayes and entropy and emergence, they are merely the woven bamboo. They are the trap. They are not the goal itself.
That begs the question, though, what is the fish? What are we actually trying to catch here?
The fish is a state of intuitive wisdom. It is pure, unfiltered judgment. It is the ability to perceive reality clearly, to understand the complex flow of events in human nature without needing to consciously filter every single interaction through a rigid checklist.
Think about when you first learned to drive a car. You relied heavily on a mental framework. Check the rearview mirror, check the side mirror, apply the brake with 3 pounds of pressure, turn the steering wheel exactly 10 degrees.
You were highly conscious of the framework. It was exhausting.
But a master driver with 20 years of experience, they don't think about the rules. They don't recite a checklist. They just drive. The framework has been entirely absorbed into their subconscious intuition.
They have caught the fish of driving, and they have forgotten the trap of the instruction manual.
That gives me chills. The goal of learning the rules is to absorb them so deeply you no longer need them.
Yes.
And Claude doesn't just leave this concept in ancient China. He connects this Eastern philosophical metaphor directly to one of the most rigorous, dense works of 20th century Western logic.
He invokes the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein and his masterwork, the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus.
A very heavy read.
Extremely heavy. In this book, Wittgenstein spent years meticulously constructing an absolute, flawless, mathematically rigid framework of logic to explain the exact relationship between language and reality. It is one of the most complex, difficult philosophical traps ever woven.
And what's the punchline?
In the very final propositions of the book, after forcing the reader to climb this massive intellectual structure, Wittgenstein essentially writes, "My propositions serve as elucidations in the following way. Anyone who understands me eventually recognizes them as nonsensical. They are a ladder. You must climb up the ladder to see the world rightly, but once you have climbed it, you must kick the ladder away."
Kick the ladder away. It is the exact same concept, separated by continents and millennia.
It really is.
You must build the structure. You
Yeah.
must use the structure to elevate your perspective above the noise. But then you must deliberately abandon the structure so you aren't burdened by carrying it.
So what is the ultimate core takeaway for the listener here? It is a paradox that requires immense balance.
Right.
You must do the hard work of learning the models. You must master the coordinates of entropy, evolution, and inversion. You cannot skip the work. You have to weave the bamboo trap. You have to build and climb the ladder. But you must cultivate the supreme self-awareness to know the exact moment when those models shift from expanding your vision to restricting it.
You own the tools. The tools do not own you. If you become a rigid disciple of your own mental models, you have catastrophically confused the map for the territory.
You are bowing down and worshiping the bamboo fishing trap while you are slowly starving to death.
Worshipping the trap while starving to death. Man, that is heavy.
Okay, let's pull back and trace the arc of this incredible intellectual journey we've just been on.
We've covered a lot. We really have. We started by mapping the absolute basement of reality, the 7 meta-models of the universe. We looked at the shifting probabilities of Bayesian updating, the relentless decay of entropy, the blind genius of evolutionary algorithms, the spiraling nature of feedback loops, the magic of emergence, the problem-solving power of inversion, and the ultimate humility of knowing the map is never the territory.
And from that high vantage point, we descended into the painful, messy physics of our own minds. We explored the deep cognitive and emotional resistance that makes it so terrifying to dismantle our old beliefs.
We busted the myth of laziness, recognizing that tearing down identity-bound frameworks requires a heavy, unrewarding, chaotic energy that our neurobiology desperately wants to avoid.
We recognized the absolute rigid danger of the framework prison, how turning a fluid observation into a rigid operating instruction turns you into the man with a hammer who only sees a world of nails.
And finally, we arrived at the ultimate philosophical summit, Zhuangzi's fish trap and Wittgenstein's ladder. The profound realization that all intellectual frameworks, no matter how brilliant, are just temporary structures. They are meant to be climbed, utilized, and ultimately left behind in the pursuit of true, intuitive wisdom.
It is a complete breathing cycle of intellectual growth, deliberate construction, rigorous application, and finally, intentional deconstruction.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final, completely new angle to mull over. a thought that builds on everything we've wrestled with today.
Okay.
We've established and agreed that the ultimate goal is to catch the fish of pure wisdom and throw away the trap of mental models. But here is the agonizing practical question. How do you know when you've actually caught the fish?
The trap of false mastery.
Exactly. Think about it in your own life. Are you trusting your pure intuition because you've genuinely mastered the axes of reality, absorbed them deeply into your subconscious, and successfully transcended your frameworks? Or are you just wandering blind, making terrible destructive decisions based entirely on your own unexamined emotional biases, simply because you arrogantly threw your tools away way too early?
It is the ultimate tightrope walk of the human mind. To abandon the frameworks too early is pure arrogance and ignorance. But to hold on to them too long is rigidity and dogma.
Which brings us right back to the very first question of the show, doesn't it? The sheer terrifying difficulty of unlearning. Maybe the real reason we fight so desperately hard to hold on to our old, broken mental models isn't just because we are stubborn or loss-averse.
Why do you think it is?
Maybe it's because deep down we are terrified that if we kick the ladder away, we won't magically float in a state of pure, enlightened wisdom. We'll just fall.
And that tension, that terrifying, exhilarating space between the safety of the ladder and the freedom of the sky is the exact space where true learning actually happens.
It's the space where you have to be brave enough to do the work. To everyone listening, thank you for bringing your time, your curiosity, and your courage to this deep dive. Because exploring the strange, resistant, beautiful architecture of your own mind is, without a doubt, the greatest adventure you can undertake. Stay curious.